X-23's first appearance is NYX number 3. That's true, but it's also not true. And what if I told you that X-23 had 3 separate mothers? I'll explain, that's coming right up. Hey, I'm Jesse, welcome to JLSComics. Today we're going to be talking about X-23, the famous person who we've seen a few different times, most recently in the movie Logan. She has an ongoing series right now as well called All New Wolverine through Marvel Comics. And we're going to talk a little bit about her origin and her history. It's a little bit convoluted. I'm going to try to break it down and explain it to you nice and simple here. And we actually have, in the case of this character, Laura Kinney, X-23, we have 3 separate origins, all essentially, you know, the same core story, but there are some variations there. So I'm going to explain those to you, break it down nice and easy. All right. So first thing I said at the beginning was that NYX number 3 was her first appearance, and that is true. That was her first appearance in comic book form, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But she had another appearance, and that was in a TV show through WB Kids called X-Men Evolution. In the 3rd season, it was the 11th episode, she appeared in a episode aptly named X-23. And incidentally, when this was recorded, it was the 11th of March, 3/11. So that was season 3, episode 11. There's a little connection for you. Anyways, in this episode, we meet a lady. Her name is Dr. Deborah Rissman. And she came to S.H.I.E.L.D. She was very worried. She had been responsible for the creation of a genetic weapon, and we find out it's a clone of Wolverine. And she worked for not the facility, not Transgen, it was Hydra. She worked for Hydra. So her weapon escaped, broke into a S.H.I.E.L.D. Top secret facility, accessed the records, and found out that Wolverine, she was created from Wolverine's DNA. So she actually went to the X-Mansion, took out all the X-Men, including Professor X, finally meets Wolverine, has this big showdown. Wolverine doesn't want to fight because he knows who she is. And that was how we really get to first meet X-23. She's like this, you know, wilder sort of character. You know, pretty different than when we get to see her next, actually. Drastically different. She was created by Craig Kyle, and Chris Yost. And they were the writers, and they did the screenplay for it. Interestingly enough, the reason why she came about in the show was because you had Chris Yost there that was working with Craig, Avi Arad, Kevin Feige was there in Marvel TV Studios, and they wanted to make this new show called X-Men Evolutions. And basically it was, you know, a couple of them were the students, and then a couple were the adults. One of which they wanted to make was the idea to make Logan one of the kids, but no, he turned out not to be. So instead, they created this new character called X-23, made from his DNA, that would still, you know, appeal to that younger generation and fit that mold that they were trying to fill with Wolverine. So they created X-23, and that was her origin story there. Created by Dr. Deborah Rissman for Hydra. Alright, that was in 2003. She was in a later episode as well called Target X in the next season, but that's not what we're going to talk about right now. Next we're going to talk about her comic book appearance, which was NYX number 3. It was actually written by Joe Quesada with art by Josh Middleton. So typical Joe Quesada. Hey, let's take this character everybody loves, you know, she was a huge hit in the show. Let's put her in a comic book, but let's make her a whore. So that's kind of what they did, sadly, making light of it. It was a 7-part series. It was originally, you know, solicited to be an ongoing. Ended up being 7 parts. So let's settle something right now. Some people say NYX, and some people say NYX. NYX is referring to a cosmetic company and to a Greek mythology. But in this case, it's the same letters. It's NYX. It stands for New York District X, which was part of, I believe it was Mutant Town, part of Manhattan, near the East Village or somewhere in that vicinity. So it's New York District X, NYX. Okay, now we got that out of the way. So we get to meet this group of they're homeless mutants, you know, young mutants in the city just trying to make their way. We have Kaiden Nixon, who we meet first. There's Tatiana, there's Bobby, and then in the 3rd episode we meet X-23. So basically, they don't know her name, which doesn't have a name yet. but she's homeless. She's this underage prostitute, and she has a pimp named Zebra Daddy. Basically she has these clients that she goes to see, and they do these things. Some of them they know that she has claws, and some of them like to be cut. It's kind of interesting story to say the least. So she ends up breaking away. She meets these new friends. She breaks away from Zebra Daddy, but he doesn't like that. So he comes after her. He sends some people after her, and basically she ends up killing Zebra Daddy so that she can save her friends, her new friends. But contrary to how she was in X-Men Evolutions, she's like this pale, withdrawn, sad, child who was dressed in like this, gothic sort of style that, is physically representative of how she feels on the inside. So she's with her friends. All right. Next place we see her is in Uncanny X-Men. It's issue 450 and 451. Those are written by Chris Claremont, who had come back onto the title after a long hiatus. Basically, the X-Men were in New York City. They were looking for a killer, and they crossed paths. They ended up crossing paths with X-23, who was a waitress at the time. And long story short there, she ended up joining the team. And you can see, as in one of the covers here, that she borrowed one of Wolverine's costumes. And it was actually a costume that Wolverine got from a character named Fang, who we talked about in a previous episode. It was the Hulk one, by the way. Wolverine Hulk one. So she's with the team. However, this part of her story largely got retconned, and I'll explain that down the road in a second here. That was basically largely ignored by future writers. All right. So then we still don't know her story, her backstory, and how she got to be who she is, other than in X-Men Evolution. But now we get X-23, Innocence Lost. This came out in 2005, and here we finally get to learn her origin and her backstory as it pertains to the comic books. This, just like the episodes of the animated series, this was also by Craig Kyle and Chris Yost. It's the same team, right? So basically what happens here is we have a top secret weapons program run in this place called the Facility. And they're contracted by the government to continue the original Weapon X program, which is a bioweapons application project. The same program that created Wolverine, same program that created Weapon X, same program that created Sabretooth, and a whole bunch of other villains, right? Weapon X, they've done at least 10 since then, and others after. So this program in particular is run by Martin Sutter, Dr. Xander Rice, who incidentally was the son of one of the people that Wolverine killed when he first escaped from Weapon X. And we have a Dr. Sarah Kinney here, very important character. So they're creating this bioweapons program under contract. They have many failed attempts. They can't figure out why. The Y chromosome keeps disintegrating in the genetic labs, so their embryos are failing. On the 23rd attempt, Dr. Kinney finally was able to create a successful, stable embryo. She actually, instead of using another Y chromosome, she took an X chromosome, a duplicated X chromosome. So this was something that wasn't approved to create a new, using some of the other DNA. But Dr. Xander Rice said, fine, go ahead with the project, but as your punishment, you need to carry this embryo to term. So that's what she had to do. So 9 months later, she gives birth, and she gives birth to X-23. Dr. Xander Rice is very sadistic, evil, and I think part of it has to do with knowing that part of this person that he created is responsible for killing his father. So he holds that grudge and that anger towards her, even though she had nothing to do with it. He just sees a bit of Wolverine in her, takes it out on her. Actually, at one point, it pulled out her claws with no anesthesia, and covered them in adamantium. He did all these sort of horrible, torturous tests on her. Created the trigger scent, and basically just conditioned her to be this living weapon, this bioweapon that he could use. Force multiplication was in full effect here. Send her out in the field. She could do the work of 10, 20 men. Basically, what would happen was people would hire the company for assassinations and various kill missions, and they would send her out on these. and they would pay him very nicely in return for these assassination missions. She lived in this cell all by herself. She had no affection, no human contact, no kindness, except for Sarah Kinney. So even though she was a weapon, right? She was created to be this weapon. She's still human. As much as she is a weapon, she's still a human. She's still a child. You know, she still feels. She knows what's going on. Even though this is her only world, she kind of knows what's going on. She cuts herself sometimes, sadly. And when Sarah Kinney finds out, she's shocked and appalled by this. She can't understand why that would be happening. Well, she can understand, and she's just really saddened by it. And because she sees this pain that this girl was going through, she concocts this plan to get her out of the facility. At one point, one of Sarah's relatives, it was a niece, was abducted. So she actually sneaked X-23 out of the lab, out of the facility. X-23 rescued the niece and actually killed the killer. When they came back, Sarah was fired. So what happened at this point was Dr. Xander Rice, he's trying to take over the whole place. So he orders X-23 to kill Martin Sutter, who was running the whole operation at this point. Ends up happening, and X-23 actually tells Sarah that it was Xander Rice that ordered that hit. She's really sad by it. This also is another really, really sad part of the story. Kind of caps it out here. Sarah wrote a letter to X-23 saying, because she's not there right now, right? She's off. She got fired. She's saying to destroy all the other samples. At one point, Xander Rice had revealed that there were all these other pods with X-24 all the way up to X-50 in the facility, right? So she has to kill them all. She does that. She goes and she kills Xander Rice. But right before that happens, Xander has a vial of trigger scent. Opens it. So when X-23 goes back to Sarah, she has the trigger scent, goes berserk, and ends up killing Sarah Kinney. Stabs her. They're out outside in the snow, kills her with her claws. And it's really sad because that was the only lady who showed her affection throughout her childhood. And, the only person who seemed like they cared and did care. The person that showed her love, the only person that she loved. But it wasn't her fault, it was the trigger scent. Right before she died, she said, your name is Laura. She gave her a real human name. And she also gave her a picture of Charles Xavier, the X-Mansion, and the X-Men. So that's where that story ended. Right when she left, she goes out in the world. Next we go to X-23 Target X, which was another series that came out in 2007, so a couple years later. And this was actually the story that retconned what we first saw in Uncanny X-Men 450, right? So it picks up right where she leaves the facility, and it chronicles her first meeting with Wolverine. She get introduced to Chimera, which is kind of an arch enemy to X-23. Then we go to the new X-Men Wolverine. This is after M-Day, decimation. There's like not many mutants around anymore. A whole school bus of mutant kids from the school got blown up. Wolverine says, come join the school. Emma Frost is running it now. Let's get you here under protection. So she says, okay. Then later on is an X-Force story. She goes on missions with Wolverine, Cyclops, Archangel, Domino, and the crew. And then we get to another solo series written by Marjorie Liu, very talented creator. This was in 2010. It was called X-23. Basically, she goes out on missions on her own, kind of to find herself and ask herself, am I human? Am I a mutant? Am I just a weapon? She meets Gambit. That's where she meets the Vampire Jubilee that you all have seen. And then we go to Avengers. It was a series, basically, that was just like the Hunger Games, just like Battle Royale. These mutants would go and they would fight each other to the death, and it was, someone that she ended up surviving. So that was good. Cut to a couple years later, very recent past, Wolverine dies. X-23 recognizes that she is, that's her only relative. So she takes up the mantle and becomes the all-new Wolverine. And that's where we find ourselves in the latest volume, all-new Wolverine, and she is Wolverine. So that is her history and origin in comic book form, but I did mention she had 3 moms, didn't I? So not only do we have Dr. Deborah Rissman, Dr. Sarah Kinney, we also have Gabriela Lopez. So Fox just recently, as you are all fully aware, a movie called Logan. And in that we meet X-23, played very amazingly by a brand new young breakout artist, Daphne Keane. So basically at the end of Days of Future Past, which was the last movie, Wolverine escaped from Weapon X, right? Weapon X, the program, was stationed at Alkali Lake, which has come up repeatedly in the movies, right? But at the end, people are killed. Many people. And some DNA is taken by a company called the Essex Corporation. Okay? So cut to a few years later, we get to Logan, and there is a civilian arm of this company. It's called Alkali Transigen, and they use that same DNA that was stolen to create these bioweapon experiments, one of which was X-23. There's a nurse there named Dr. Gabriela Lopez who snuck her out of Transigen, Alkali Transigen. Later is killed by Reavers, of course. If you've seen the movie, you know that. And then she ends up being under the care of Wolverine and of Professor X throughout the movie. And that's all I'll say about it, just in case you haven't seen it. So that's who we have. We don't know if she carried the baby or if she just cared for the baby as a primary caregiver. But for all intents and purposes, she did act like X-23's mother. So there you have it. That is X-23's history in 3 different places: X-Men Evolution, the animated series, the comic books, and also in the movie that we just had. So there you go. If you like this, go ahead and hit that like button, please. If you have any comments or things to add, please add them down below in the comments for other people who might benefit from them. And if it's your first time stopping here, I'd always like you to hit that old subscribe button and the little notification bell next to it. Love to have you here with the JLSComics family, and that will do it for today. This is Jesse, and it's been another History and Origin video. So now is the part of the show where I do the shoutouts. In my last New Comic Book Wednesday haul, I couldn't decide. I actually asked, should I do a History and Origin on X-23 or should I do it on Gwenpool? And I asked you to decide for me, and X-23 won, as you can see. But I want to do the shoutouts here, so we're going to do that right now. Mr. Tom Rorden, fantastic, talented person. You know him from Killbox. He said X-23, loves Sky Doll as well, which is another book that I got. Beautiful covers. We'll talk about those in a future video. Also had Starlight Jupiter. Was very happy with the Sky Dolls as well. They look great. And some of the Venomized covers, one of which was an X-23, Venomized X-23, which you could call first appearance of the Venomized X-23. Johnny DaCosta Comics. X-23, he's always wanted to showcase her in his vids. He has some of his favorite issues are from her. Kyle Rowe was going to pick up the Sky Doll as well. He voted for Nick's 3. I actually said put the first appearance in there of the one that you want me to do. So that's X-23. Okay. Ramiro, he wanted Gwenpool. I can still do her in the future, so don't worry. Spectacular Spider Grandpa. Didn't she first appear in an X-Men cartoon? Yes, and I told you about that. Anyways, Nyx 3, NYX 3. Amazing Murphinator, NYX. The Doom 143, X-23, NYX 3. Huey's Comic Hideout. Voted for Gwenpool. First cover was Secret Wars 2. First interior was Howard the Duck #1. And then ETA Nick also really liked the Sky Doll cover. So that was the people who commented in that video. That's the shoutouts for there, so thank you all. And please go give them a look-see, see if you like them, and subscribe. I do like these channels here quite a bit. I am subscribed myself, I'm happy to say. There you go, that'll do it. Thanks everybody, and look forward to having you join us every Tuesday night for a live comic conversation podcast, and every Wednesday for a new comic book haul, as well as all the multitude of other things I have going on this channel as well. Alright, that'll do it. Jesse here, JLS Comics. See you soon.